Hey guys, Rick Taylor here with KSUSA. Today we're going to talk about how to install your Rage IS dropper and suspension seat post and talk about how to set up proper spring rate and sag on your bike. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is start off by determining our saddle height. And if you're setting a bike that's already set up with your new dropper, then you can just take a measurement from your old system and transfer it over to what we're setting up now. If you don't have a seat post in the bike, then what I would recommend doing would be to put your seat post and your saddle together. Just go ahead and install that into the bike. And we're gonna use a torque wrench and tighten down to 5 Newton meters there. And then you can get on the bike and slide the post up or down to get your full extension. Once you do that, you're going to take your measuring tape and measure from the center of the seat rail here down to the center of your bottom bracket here and get that dimension. And so you'll just want to do that as your starting point. You can fine tune that after you get the bike set up, but it'll at least give you a base mark to go off of. Now we are setting up a dropper suspension post here, and the recommended sag for this dropper is about 15 millimeters. So for most guys, when they set this up, what they'll do is take that measurement, your normal seat height, and you'll add 15 millimeters to it. So when it's topped out, it's a little bit too high for you. But once you put your weight on, it's gonna actually sag down and be in that proper position. So keep that in mind when you set it up. You can play around with this till you get a good feel. For some cross-country riders that are on technical terrain, they might not want the seat to overextend that 15 millimeters. So use it at your discretion. Maybe you split the difference in 7 or 8 millimeters of extra extension. But play around with it until you get a fit that works for you, but just something to keep in mind when you're getting your setup done here. Here on the bench, we're gonna go ahead and install our saddle. First thing I'd recommend is a little bit of fiber grip, and you can choose whatever brand you like. And I would put just a small squirt of that here where the rails are going to clamp. So this is your lower clamp, this is your upper clamp, a little bit here as well. This has a kind of a Silca gel, and what happens is that Silca kind of gives a bite and allows that seat rail, especially on titanium or chromoly rails where they're really hard, it just allows it to kind of bite in and get a good grip. Now on the rest of the hardware, I'd recommend a little bit of waterproof grease. And so putting that on the seat there, as well as the threads of the bolts, putting a little bit on these cylindrical nuts, as well as a little bit down here where the cradle sits. Just prevents the metal to metal contact, which can cause extra noise. You can have water buildup and corrosion there. So it's just a little bit of extra insurance. You don't want to grease the seat rails because you don't want those slipping. But the rest of the stuff, a little bit of grease is a good thing. We'll just thread these on a few turns. Makes it easier to get it started if we can do it that way. Okay. And then you want to just seat these down in here. That gives you the most extension here, the easiest chance of getting this all to line up easy. Okay. And once you get it on, I find that it makes it a lot easier to kind of tip the saddle forward. That helps hold that cylindrical nut in place. And then you just go ahead and turn that. Okay, and I'm kind of going to look at this so that I've got an approximate seat tube angle of the bike, and I'll just keep tightening this up until I get it close to where I want it, where I think it's probably going to be level in the bike. We'll have to do a final adjustment on this once we get the bike, get this installed on the bike and the bike on the ground. but we'll just do this so that it stays in place for us now. Okay, now the other thing you want to pay attention to when you set this up is that most saddles have marks here showing the minimum fore and aft position. Make sure you keep your clamp within those marks, more for the saddle than for the seat post clamp, because you can strain the rails on your seat if you don't keep it within that range. So set it up where you think it's going to be properly centered, and just tighten it enough so the seat doesn't slip out of position or fall off the post as we do the next part of the installation. Now, as per the frame manufacturer's instructions, we've got our cable routed in. Whether you're running a traditional route, which is here where the fixed end of the cable is at the remote and the clamp end is here, or whether you're going to have a fixed end, or not fixed, but pinch bolt at the remote, and then also the collar. Either way, we still want to put the collar on this end. So now we have, that's the free play that you need there. From here to here is 15 millimeters, 15 millimeters. Now we're going to take a 3 millimeter, put it in one side of the barrel, and then a 2 millimeter on the side with the set screw, and we're going to tighten it down. You'll see the cable's going to want to kind of arc a little bit as we tighten it, which is good. Take your finger and push here and straighten that out. So now you have perfect right angle there. Now this part's pretty important, and a lot of people screw this up. You want to use a diagonal cutter, not a bicycle cable cutter when you cut this off. The reason is we want that end of the cable to be as flush to the barrel as possible. So we're going to put the cutters down with the flush side downward, and we're going to cut that off. And you can see that leaves a very flat, clean cable end there, and that's what we want. Okay, next thing we're going to do is install the cable into our post. And if you look here on the actuator, you have one side that's a continuous loop, and the other side here is kind of a hook. And the way to do this is to hook that so that the cable fits on that cutout, rotate it in, and then we're going to hook it in, and we're going to push that all the way in. Now there's a set screw here, and that's a 1.5 millimeter. We're going to tighten that down. You only need to do a few turns, and what that does is just locks that in place. So as we're moving the cable in or out of the frame, the housing goes with it. It doesn't separate and cause issues inside. Okay, the next thing that's important is as we're pushing this in, we want to go up to the front of the bike and pull the cable out. If you jam this down inside without relieving that extra cable that you're feeding in, the cable tends to wad up. It might get caught in a bend or a bind inside and will cause improper performance of your seat post. And you could possibly damage the cable if you bend it or kink it too drastically. So just make sure that as you're pushing this in, you feed it in. I like to get it in just so it starts. And then I'm going to take a little bit of fiber grip, and I would put a small amount on the post. Especially rub it around where your limit line and serial number is, because those are laser etched. And this fiber prep also prevents electrolysis. So if you put this in a carbon frame with nothing between it, the carbon and the aluminum want to share electrons, and that builds up a corrosion and galvanic reaction, which can actually, if you leave it for a long period of time, can start to fuse the seat post to the carbon frame. And probably all heard the dreaded stories about not being able to get a seat post out of a carbon frame. That's what's happening. So if you do this and then you redo this every time you do your service interval for your maintenance, you'll never have your seat post get stuck in your carbon frame, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and move this down, okay? And then we're gonna go ahead and take that measurement that we talked about earlier, and we'll do that on this side of the bike so you can kind of see what we're doing too. Okay, so we'll take the measurement. Once we get that where we want it, We're going to go ahead and tighten up the binder. And maximum that we recommend on this is 4 Newton meters. And you see I have a little single use type. This is set at 4 Newton meters. And so once it gets tight, it's going to click for me. And we know that's set at 4 Newton meters. If you go over that, what can happen is that extra tension can distort this tube. There's bushings in there. And when that's distorted, it can make the post sticky and not function the way that it should. If you're using the carbon prep and 4 Newton meters, there generally shouldn't be any reason that your seat post would slip in the frame. That should be more than enough compressive force to hold that in place for you. Okay, so then the last thing that we're going to do is talk about how to set up our sag and also our pressure. So you've got a chart that came with your seat post that you can refer to, and it's going to go by your body weight, and then there's a corresponding PSI pressure. And generally those are going to give you about 15 millimeters of sag. And when we're talking about sag, if you're not familiar with those suspension terms, it's essentially how much the post will drop down when you put your body weight on it. So you're basically loading the spring, the air spring in this case, in the post. Why that's important is that you're going to not only hit bumps that drop you down, but also that come up. So having kind of a floating neutral position in the center prevents you from topping out every time you hit a bump and unload, and basically puts you in kind of a neutral position where you're kind of floating on a cloud. So ideally about 15 millimeters gets you in a good position where you don't compromise your pedal stroke, but you're also getting the maximum comfort out of it. And so to do that, use the chart. You're going to take your air pump. Now, something to note is that a lot of the shock pumps only go up to like 350 or 400 PSI. They're designed for a very large volume rear shock or fork. And in order to make this system work and hold up a person's body weight and fit into your frame, this is a very high pressure but very small volume system. So we recommend making sure that you get a high pressure that'll go up to about 600 PSI. And they are available through your local bike shop. KS makes this one called the Air8. And the other thing that you want to look for on these is a 2-stage valve system. So where this threads on, we'll put this onto the post. Okay. And thread that in. And then we thread this piece in, and that's going to open the valve core here on the post. Okay. And then we're going to air it up to what the chart says our pressure should be for our body weight. And then you're going to unscrew just the back half of the chuck here. What that did is that closed the Schrader valve inside. So now when we unscrew the pump from the post, you're only going to release the air that was inside here. All the air that's inside the post will remain. Now keep in mind that if you are curious and you want to put the pump back on and test your pressure again, it will be lower, because what happens is as you put this hose back on and it opens the valve, some of that air has to fill this hose back up before it gets to the gauge. So every time you put your pump on, it will mark a little bit lower pressure than what you set it at. It doesn't mean that you've got a problem with your post. It just means that that's normal and it's filling it. But for setting it, like I talked about, we'll thread this out and then we'll unscrew here. And that hiss that we heard is just the air pressure in the hose. Then always make sure you put your valve cap back on. Don't go ride or test this without the valve cap. Not because you're going to lose pressure or have a leak there, but this is where the valve is in an area, basically anywhere here on the bike, is where the trajectory of dirt and debris is going to come up. What you don't want to do is get dirt in there and then use your pump and pump a bunch of dirt into the system. So just make sure you put the cap on before you do any riding on the bike. One last thing to help you on your sag setup is we did include an O-ring here. And depending on, this is an early production sample that I've got here, so it's got a black O-ring. Yours probably has kind of a greenish gray O-ring on it, but they both do the same job. And what you do there is slide this all the way down till it bottoms out. Step up onto your bike and don't bounce on your seat. Just sit on the seat and let your body weight compress the post. And what will happen is, as this moves down, this will touch the seal and it'll move up a certain amount. And when you take your weight off, you've got this gap that's created here. Then you can take your measuring tape and measure, and you can determine if you've got the right amount of sag for your system. And you can also kind of use that to help determine if you've lost some air pressure over time, because if the sag starts increasing and you haven't changed the air pressure yourself, that's an indication that you need to go back in and top off the air over time. We're going to go ahead and adjust our saddle position fore and aft, as well as nose up or nose down to get it set up. So generally you're going to want to do this when the bike is on the ground. That way it gives you a level kind of in use position for the bike, and then you can adjust. So that you can adjust the tilt with your 2 bolts here, and then fore and aft, you obviously just slide it on the rails. So once you get the seat position that you want, the next step is to torque these clamp bolts down. And so your torque values are laser etched on your post. So check those out and make sure that you torque to that spec. Use a high grade torque wrench. And you want to, what's really important on this is that both of these are torqued evenly. So even more important than the actual torque value itself, being torqued evenly is going to prevent that saddle from wanting to walk or move out of position. So again, make sure you use your torque wrench. The last thing that we should talk about is your remote installation. And because we offer so many various remotes that are all compatible with all the different droppers, we didn't go over a specific remote installation today. But if you go to kssuspension.com, same place that you saw this video, and check out all of our install videos for the remotes, just pick the one that you've selected and you can watch that. It'll dovetail in with this video to install the seat post, and it'll get you all dialed in and ready to go.